A lot of us have known this, and some of us have learned it in school, and others have kind of come to it, I think, in like our own sensibilities. But the nature of the universe is abundance, and we've got it, and like it's out here for us. It's been curtailed. It's been, frankly, hidden from folks. It's been redlined from other folks. So there's a lot that we need to take into consideration when we don't have access to it.
Lesson there that has been reinforced in so many ways in my life is like, if you open the door to the universe and bring your best self, the universe always answers you back. And like, the hardest thing is to remember to bring your best self to the door and push it open. Like, that's what's really hard. And we tell ourselves the story.
In the summer of 2020, I went down to the Capitol Hill Occupy protest. There was so much going on, but what immediately caught my eye was a community garden coming to life at rapid speed in the center of it all. My experiences at the Chop Garden, which was later rededicated as the Black Lives Memorial Garden, really got me thinking about the power of occupying urban space, and particularly the power of radical urban food production, both as a political act and as a community-based form of mutual aid. My own interest in urban food production and food systems in general started way back during my freshman year at UW. I had heard that there was a student farm program, which sounded really intriguing to me, so I began showing up to socialize and volunteer. I was pretty blown away by how this tiny urban farm produced so much quality produce, and something was just so intrinsically exciting to me about the opportunity to be so connected to the land in the middle of a bustling city. Were the forces that created the UW farm and the BLMG related to each other in any way? What could I learn by looking at these projects through lenses of radical urbanism and guerrilla food production as political action? What could I learn from trying to tell the stories of these projects and how they've evolved over time? I wanted to study radical urban food production, but mostly I wanted to participate in it. So I decided I would stay involved at the UW farm, get more involved with BLMG, and work to start an entirely new radical urban food production project, and then write a storybook about all of these experiences. In this video, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to each of these acts, and an even briefer introduction into what I've come to think of as the nature of radical urban food production. Before I had the words to describe it, I had my own radicalizing experience with urban agriculture at the UW farm. Interacting with the space and the community completely changed the course of my life. I fell in love with the process of growing food, and I've decided to pretty much dedicate my life to it. The more people I talked to about the farm, the more I heard this theme emerge. Many UW students' lives have been shaped by this farm, which was a gift from students to students. It all began with a core group of motivators, a critical nexus of the right people coming together, including Eli Wheat, a PhD student at the time, Doug Ewing, the manager of the botany greenhouse, and several biology faculty and staff. Students had been looking for a space on campus to start a farm, but with no luck finding an official space, Doug told the group to just dig up the underused lawn by the botany greenhouse. In 2005, a student group led by Eli Wheat broke ground on the tiny quarter-acre site. From there, the energy built steadily for years. The central location on campus allowed the farm to be a hub of activity, easily accessible to students and the community. While there was faculty and staff support, the project was entirely student-led. The most involved and motivated students became organizers, and they managed the space and the community using cooperative and democratic principles. All decisions were made by consensus, and responsibilities were divided and delegated to various committees. The entire structure of student leadership had complete freedom to make decisions. Some students were so dedicated that they practically lived at the farm. A couple years into the project, students decided that each season one among them would be the director. Nina Arlene was one of these directors, and she described spending 40 hours a week working on the farm, unpaid. But as Eli described it, we were all so in love with the farm. It was as easy as breathing to do those things because we cared about it so much. Eventually, such a critical mass of students and energy was reached that the group realized they needed to move to a bigger space. Thus began a long and somewhat painful period of growth and transition. After several disappointments, students were eventually granted a piece of land at the Center for Urban Horticulture and a second piece at the Mercer Court Apartments. Taking on so much land was incredibly exciting, but also overwhelming. Students were putting so much of their energy and time into this project. They were beginning to burn out. In response, a team of faculty and staff eventually created a coalition to fund a farm manager position. And in 2013, Sarah Gerkink, the first UW Farm non-student manager, was hired. From there, the farm has continued to grow, especially in terms of growing capacity. What began as a quarter-acre Guerrilla garden is now a 2+ acre urban farm that produced 11.5 tons of food in 2020. As you might expect, the farm today is no longer led by a radical group of students obsessed with consensus decision-making. There are paid staff positions, a lot more responsibilities, and way more by-the-books decision-making. For Eli Wheat, who is now a faculty in the program on the environment and who has watched the entire evolution of the farm, this trade-off is somewhat painful to accept. The era of radical student action and empowerment have faded to leave behind something much more institutional and incorporated. But here I am, including the UW Farm in my capstone, in part as a love letter to the space that radicalized me. Despite all the changes, the initial energy still runs under the surface. To quote Guattari, the UW Farm was my vector of subjugation. That ran counter to the normal order of things, a counter-repetition, an intensive given which invoked other intensities to form a new existential configuration. In simpler terms, the UW Farm was so radically different from anything that I had experienced before that it fundamentally changed the way I think about the world, and particularly, it changed my expectations for how we can use urban space and how communities can come together to share resources and support themselves. With the city erupting in activism and the Capitol Hill neighborhood on its way to becoming an occupied protest, Marcus Henderson felt called to Guerrilla Garden in the heart of it all. He strapped a shovel to his bike and headed to Cal Anderson Park, where he planted a single basil plant. Others noticed and joined in. In 4 days, 4 garden beds had been established, with cardboard mulch and compost, and over the next month, community donations and activity filled the garden with plants, educational signage, tools, irrigation systems, conversation circles, and more. CHOP was an incredible hub of activity, filled with people non-stop for the entirety of its existence. A microcosm of this constant activity occurred in the garden, where activists felt an intense need to participate constructively. As one organizer described it, people felt not only the need to be present, but the need to engage in a way that's totally radical, and a way that's absolutely safe. Because what was happening to that community was warfare. From the beginning, Marcus was the figurehead of the movement, and the image of him building the garden became a brand. Hundreds of people showed up just to talk to him. However, his intention was never to be a leader. and while the media focused on him, behind that, a consensus-based and community-driven process was blossoming. Several key organizers, including Marcus, were there virtually every day, living and breathing the garden. In the evenings, community meetings would determine what projects would be taken on the next day, and folks showing up to volunteer, donate, or share knowledge were welcomed with open arms and encouraged, so long as they could respect the intention of holding space for BIPOC leaders. Early participants described the decision-making process and the evolution of the space as wholly organic and yet incredibly intentional as well. With great care, organizers created a space for building community, engaging in conversation, sharing knowledge about the intersections of race, class, and food justice in America, and of course, building a beautiful garden. The food grown was funneled into the network of mutual aid around CHOP. Groups such as Riot Kitchen used the garden's produce to create nutritious vegan meals, which were passed out to protesters, unhoused folks, and the gardeners for free. A totally alternative, radical system of community resource sharing was flourishing. Organizers realized that the momentum and energy they were building could be bigger than the moment. For many of these folks, including Marcus, building a land-based and BIPOC-focused community was a long-time dream, and they felt that they were experiencing the beginning of such a dream coming to fruition. So, they gathered in a friend's apartment, and as socially distanced as possible, and began sharing thoughts on a Google Drive, while yelling to each other from room to room. The outcome of this conversation was the formation of Black Star Farmers, a BIPOC-led community organization which has gone on to revitalize several urban growing spaces around Seattle with the intention of activating them for BIPOC communities. They have also co-developed a food share program based on the Swahili principle of Ujamaa, cooperative economics. Their momentum, intentionality, and care appear unstoppable. For my third act, I wanted to work with the community to establish a new garden. I ended up working with the Lake City Collective to make a series of planter boxes in the Little Brook neighborhood of North Seattle. These planter boxes were meant to be community garden spaces in a neighborhood where there's little green space and little public space in general. Lake City Collective and the Little Brook neighborhood were incredibly generous to let me work in their space and with them to create these gardens. Making these gardens was so much more complicated and difficult than I imagined going in, and it would not have been possible without the incredible team at Lake City Collective and the Little Brook Youth Corps that I got to work with. I'm incredibly grateful to them, and I'm incredibly excited that we actually were able to make the gardens in the end. I only have time now to show you a montage of everything that happened, but I hope you enjoy. explored in these acts are very different from each other, existing in different timescales, motivated by different causes, and serving different communities. There are threads that run through them all. I come away from studying and participating in these projects with 7 principles that I believe are characteristic of these projects, and maybe of radical urban food production in general. First, grassroots origins. All of these gardens were started by people without much power or many resources, simply an insatiable motivation to do something to make positive change in their community. Second, radical vision. While these gardens started small, they were all driven by a radical and complete vision of how the world can be a better, more equitable place, where everyone has access to safe and sustainable resources, and where every community is empowered by their physical space. Third, fully dedicated organizers. Eli Wheat and all the students who started the UW Farm, all the UW Farm managers since then, Marcus and the other core members of Black Star Farmers, Peggy and Cesar at Lake City Collective. All of these people are the type of people that you can't help shake your head at and wonder, how are they so dedicated? How are they so selfless? How do they work so hard? And it's because, for them, it's not working, it's just living more fully. Fourth, non-hierarchical and cooperative structures of governance. All of these gardens are led by community organizers who were and are committed to leading by cooperative principles and creating structures of governance that are outside the dominant capitalist mainstream of hierarchical leadership. Fifth, the ability to empower. All of these gardens create radical spaces where, in Guattari's words, people have the opportunity to experience something that runs counter to the normal order of things. This opportunity opens up possibilities that allow people to participate and become empowered through learning, growth, connection, and discovering their own ability to take action and lead. Sixth, embedded in community, of course. Community is everything. These gardens would be more weightless than air without the communities they are embedded in. Each aspect of these gardens begins and ends with community input. And finally, the potential to create larger systemic change over time. Despite the small scale and humble origins of all of these gardens, they are all immersed in communities that are using radical urban food production as a catalyst to create larger systemic positive change. Particularly, the UW Farm and the Black Lives Memorial Garden were, in their conception, places where physical space to cultivate the land and put hands in soil was coupled with spiritual space for conversation about the need for systemic changes in our society and how to put those changes into place. From those original starting places, both of those gardens have grown both in scale and in community and have gone on to do truly impactful things for the people that they're serving. As for the Littlebrook Gardens, it's too soon to say what their ultimate role will play in the community. But regardless, I know that the Lake City Collective will still be there, succeeding to bring more resources and empowerment to their community against all odds, because that's just the kind of people that they are.